Talk to me a little bit more about, we'll get to the region shortly, but let's start off in Africa with your business there. I mean, what kind of expansion is currently planned? What kind of acquisitions are you looking at? What's the next milestone?
Well, the original vision was to have a majority position in 10 to 15 key countries. We're now in 7 countries, and we're continuing to invest in Union Bank of Nigeria. I think our focus right now is completing the next stage of investment in UBN. We really like Nigeria. We think it's in a much better position post the shocks that hit that economy and that currency with the collapse of the oil prices. We think the agricultural sector, for example, has grown very nicely. And we've just made a second very large investment in UBN.
So are you on track then in terms of doubling your fiscal year profits?
Yes, that's the statement we made, and we would still expect to do that, yeah.
And are any asset sales planned at all at this point?
I can't think of anything along those lines. And I think our focus, there are other countries that we're interested in beyond the 7 that we're in right now, but the focus is completing the integration. Last year in 2016, we acquired a second bank in Rwanda and a second bank in Zambia. And then we went through the integration, and I'm leaving here to go to Lusaka to be with our team as we complete the integration and change the brand across the entire country of Zambia.
The Union Bank story, how are you looking to increase the stake there? And when as well? Do you have the timing pinned down at this stage?
Yeah, so there's a couple of pieces to it. UBN just celebrated its 100th year. Until the late 70s, it was Barclays. It is a very, very strong brand, but it ran into real troubles prior to the financial crisis. We were able to acquire 20% of UBN directly from the government of Nigeria, from the central bank, 2 years ago. And we're also part of a consortium that includes 4 or 5 other significant investors who had taken their stake 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago now. So we have a 10 to 11% stake from the consortium, 20% outside. And we just closed on an additional 14%, buying out the position of another consortium member. We're closing within a week or 2 on a rights issue that was previously announced. And when all of that's said and done, we'll be at 44, 45, 46, 47% of UBN, somewhere in that range.
When it comes to this part of the world, Dubai, have you been able to get hold of any licenses at all?
In most of our markets and treasury activities that are done offshore. So if you think about the business we're doing in Nigeria, in Rwanda, in Botswana, with corporate clients around currencies and around hedging other risks. That domestic business is done through a desk that's managed right here in Dubai. And one of the reasons for that is this is the right center for us to do the other side of that trade, which is to do business with the big investment managers in the U.S., Wellington, BlackRock, Fidelity, as a few examples.
You're very bullish on the European story. First time you're bullish, I think, what is it, 12 years?
I said 12 years,
12 years, yeah. So what are you looking to buy in Europe? What's at the top of your agenda?
So we've acquired a bank in Greece. It's a small bank. We've just appointed a terrific chief executive. We're developing the technology to be a truly challenger bank in Greece, taking on deposits and making loans to small businesses. There are opportunities very similar to this in Italy, and we're working with a number of people on the ground in Italy. And we think both Greece and Italy are at the point where it's time to invest in the banks again. It's been 10 years since the financial crisis.
So the UK and sort of mainland Europe is not a priority for you?
Well, we think core Europe is very exciting, but we start with, in both Greece and Italy, some of the issues hit them first in the financial services, particularly in Greece. So they're really the first to recover.
Bob, I want you to weigh in with me on something, because we did have, of course, calls for more transparency when it comes to bad loan disposals, especially in Italy. Is that something that you see as constructive, that needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, Yusuf, if you go back to the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009, the U.S. was very quick to force their banks to clean up their balance sheet. So the TARP program, which Secretary Paulson instituted with Congress, number one, it put equity into all of the banks. Number two, it required them, before paying back that equity, to clean up the balance sheet and pass a Fed stress test. And then finally, required them to pass that stress test before they could really pay dividends. And I think the U.S. banks have been ahead of the curve in terms of cleaning up the balance sheet and lending again. This is really just hitting hard in Europe right now. So in Greece and Italy, any of these actions to get the non-performing loans off the balance sheet of the banks and into the private sector, we think is very, very positive.
When you look at the turmoil in senior management across UK banks, I mean, what strikes you about that? How do you look at the scene over there?
One of the things that we've been able to do in the UK is working with a very strong partner, Q Invest, to acquire and take private Panmure Gordon, which is a UK broker-dealer. And one of the things that we're seeing is that the businesses such as equity brokerage, much of the fixed income businesses, are coming out of the banks and into the broker-dealer space. And for us, our investment in the UK so far has really been around that, around the broker-dealer space.
I want to bring it back to the region and to Saudi Arabia specifically. We last met in Riyadh, and we had a little bit of a chat. I want to know how your view might have changed now that you had the weekend to think things over and also talk to some other people outside of the kingdom.
You know, I think what's changed is that for us, you know, what do? We invest in financial services. That's our specialty. That's our focus. And for us, the change from last week is that Saudi Arabia, as a domestic financial services industry, has become investable again. And so our team is looking at opportunities there. I think, secondly, the opportunity to help the Sovereign Wealth Fund, the PIF, to invest in a more diversified way, in a more specialized way outside of Saudi Arabia is also an even better opportunity than it had been. But I think the one that's most striking to me is the opportunity to be an investor in Saudi Arabia.
So how aggressively are you wanting to go into the Saudi reform story?
So it's all of 5 days since we were at the conference, so not too aggressively yet.
Not too aggressively. And elsewhere in the region, are you looking at anything else in terms of options?
You know, the Middle East, again, we're specialists in financial services, and the opportunity in this region for us has been more apparent in sub-Saharan Africa, and I think that's where the focus of our investment will be.
Just a very quick question on Bitcoin, because it is getting a lot of traction as a story in terms of futures and a few other instruments to try and embed it more formally in sort of mainstream trade. Yeah. How do you place this in your view of the world as it is?
So I'm not sure I can add anything to the debate around cryptocurrencies, but what I do feel strongly about is that a lot of the technology that underpins some of these currencies, blockchain, is having a big impact on banking. Not just commercial banking, but central banking as well. I think the announcement recently, Yusuf, by the central banks of Hong Kong and Singapore, that they're going to work on a joint project to implement blockchain as the core technology underpinning both central banks. I think that was a very important story and something that I think is worth following.
Bob?